Again, my name's Tom Fontana. I'm with the Ohio Soybean Council. We represent soybean farmers in the state of Ohio. Our soybean farmers are very interested in uh, having the students in classrooms all around Ohio learn more about soybeans and what's involved with soybean farming. Again, you can put any questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and we will try to answer them. So without any further, we won't wait any longer. I'd like to introduce Nathan Eckel. Nathan is a farmer in Northwest Ohio near Perrysburg, Ohio in Wood County. And Nathan, why don't you tell us a little bit about your family and farm, and then we'll start talking about soybeans and what's involved with harvesting soybeans.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Like Tom said, my name is Nathan Eckel. Farm up here in Northwest Ohio. We're just south of Toledo here where we're at today. Right now we're harvesting a field just right next to the Ohio Turnpike is actually where we're at, just south of Toledo. If you see that red dot, that's where Perrysburg's located. That's where myself and my family farm. We farm right around 2,000 acres. Right there is my wife and two boys. My wife is a school teacher here at one of the elementary schools in Pemberville, Ohio, as well as both my boys go to school there in Pemberville as well. Like I said, we farm about 2,000 acres here, my two brothers and myself. In addition to the 2,000 acres that we farm, my brother also runs a feedlot, so we raise cattle. And we have roughly about 800 head of cattle that we feed all the time. We're constantly getting cattle in and shipping cattle out. So that's what we do up here. So right now today, it's a great day to have this tour today. We're doing a little bit of everything. I'm working here in the field by myself today. My middle brother is chopping silage, which is chopping corn for cattle feed for the rest of the year. We do that once a year. When the corn is just about ripe, we'll go in and chop corn silage. And so just a little bit more about my background. I went to Ohio State University back in the early 2000s, graduated from there. I was a seed sales rep for a number of years, and then transferred over to the research side where I was a assistant research associate for Pioneer Hybrid International, where we actually research soybean varieties out of Napoleon, Ohio, and did that for a number of years, and then took over our farming operation here in Wood County, and that's what we're doing today. I'm actually a fifth generation farmer, and really enjoy what I do. Get to be out here amongst nature all the time. It's not always fun, but it is very enjoyable, very enjoyable. So with that, today we are here in my combine and we're harvesting soybeans. So I'm just going to flip you guys around here and show you kind of what I'm looking at.
Hey, Nathan, can you
Yes.
just kind of real quickly go through how you ended up at this point, getting ready to harvest from planting through harvest real quickly?
Yeah, sure. So we had a really rough spring, but we went in and we usually plant somewhere around May. This year it was more like the end of May, beginning of June, even into July for some of these soybeans. But as you'll see on your screen right now, that's an emerging soybean plant that just came out of the ground, germinated right there, and is just getting a great start. If we move on to the next slide, right there we've got about 2 or 3 trifoliates on there is what we call those. Trifoliates are the leaves that are coming out of the ground right there. And this is a key time in the soybean growth stages. This is when they're very susceptible to diseases and funguses and things like that. So this is a very crucial time in its life cycle. Moving on, right here we've got flowering. So if you ever see the green plants out in the fields, if you guys ever get to go by a soybean field, you'll see these these purple flowers. And if you look just underneath the flower, you'll see the beginning of a soybean pod starting to emerge. So out of each one of these flowers that you'll see on these soybean plants, each one of these flowers will more than likely produce a pod. And we like to see 3 and 4 bean pods out of these plants. And right there, you'll see after the flowers have pollinated, and we start developing these pods, you'll see the pods growing on the plant, and you'll see 3 and 4 bean pods. And right there is a great late summer, early fall picture of a soybean field just getting ready to start to mature right there. And I think in the last slide, that's what we're going to look at, and that's what we're going to transition to right now. Those are ripe soybean plants, and will look very much similar to the field that I'm in today.
Great, thank you.
So with that, I'll give you a little tour of my office for today. So we're in a John Deere combine, and this is the field that I'm in right now. We're in an 80-acre farm. Like I said, we're just outside of Toledo. If you look over to the side here, that's the Ohio Turnpike. You'll see the semis running across there. So just to give you an idea, this is my cab. This is my office. Spend roughly 14 to 16 hours a day in here. It's got a lot of amenities. Has a great radio in it up there. Lots of monitors. I've got my iPad that's recording all my yield data there on the window, and then the other monitor that you'll see in here controls all of my auto steer on here. It even has I've got a refrigerator down here, a little cooler refrigerator underneath here, underneath the seat. Keep all my water and snacks in there, so I can continue to work throughout the day. So with that, we'll get this combine started up and keep running. So anyways, what I do normally is we've got the header in the up position, and all these buttons over here on my side console control everything. So these 2 switches that I've got over here, they are what control everything. And so when I want to start the combine up, simply press this button ahead. And now my separator is engaged, which is the part of the combine that separates the plant from the seed. My other switch here, turn this on and you'll see the header start running. And I will throttle it up. And now this combine is equipped, like I said, with auto steer. So it's set up. All I have to do is hit one button here, and it automatically puts the head down and goes right on my center line for my GPS for my auto steer, and we are cutting beans.
Very good. Hey, Nathan.
Yes.
How long does it take for a soybean plant to germinate? Once you put the seed in, how long until you actually see the plant?
So roughly we see the plant, ideally we'd like to see it in 3 to 5 days out of the ground. So it grows very fast once we put that in the ground, and that it can speed up and slow down based upon soil temperature. Ideally, we like to have these soil temps somewhere around that 55 to 56 degree range. And the neat thing about here in Northwest Ohio is our soil temps are dictated a lot, since we're so close to the lake. Our soil temps are dictated by the temperature of the lake. And the lake that I'm talking about is Lake Erie, which you would think, wow, I'm roughly 10 to 15 miles south of the lake, in some cases 20 miles. And you wouldn't think that a body of water would have anything to do with soil temperature, but it does, which is kind of neat. Mother Nature's neat in that way.
Okay. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about what happens at harvest? You're running the combine and you're going through the field. So, how fast are you going, and how are things done during harvest?
So right now I'm harvesting at about 4.3 miles an hour. I don't know if we can see that on my screen up here. It's kind of tough to see, but yeah, we're harvesting at 4.3 mile an hour. All these beans, as I'm going down through here, you can see the beans. There's a big drum, a big auger that gathers everything in this combine as I'm going down through the field. And they go in this, what I call my feeder house or throw to the combine. And we'll look at that a little bit later once I get stopped. Um, but a lot of things are going on as we're harvesting here in the field. Um, I'm coordinating with my brothers to get trucks to the elevator, and we'll talk about that in a little bit as well.
Okay.
Trying to calculate, how many beans we're going to have in the field, so I've got the right amount of trucks in the field all the time, and that differentiates based upon the yield of the beans that we're harvesting. There you go. You can
Okay.
see me a little better now.
Yeah. So how many seeds per acre do you plant of soybean? How many soybean seeds per acre?
Yeah, so when we're planting soybeans, Tom, we are planting roughly anywhere from 140,000 seeds per acre to 180,000 seeds per acre. And
Mm.
that's all based upon variety. It varies and field conditions and the planting date. The earlier the planting date, we will dial back those seed populations a little bit. And as we get later into the year, will increase those populations just because not every seed that you plant will germinate. We will, we've get roughly, we shoot for 80 to 85% of the seeds to germinate out here in these fields. So we always plant more than what we really need.
Yeah. Very good. And on average, how many bushels per acre do you harvest?
So on average, usually we're around 55 to 60 bushel per acre. This year has been a little bit of an exception, and nobody really knows why. With our late planting date, we thought we were going to have poor yields, but we've really seen some great yields this year. We're up around 70, 71 bushel to the acre, which is phenomenal for the year that we've had, the wet year that we've had, and then the dry summer.
Okay. How long till you get to the end of the field there, Nathan?
I've got a couple minutes here. If you guys want to go through, Dan,
Yeah,
and kind of show them what the combine's doing as I'm harvesting, that would
that'd be
be great at
great.
this time.
Why don't we do that? Can we show the animation?
Here we go. So this is very similar to my combine, and you can kind of see as
All
we go in.
combines must perform 3 vital tasks to effectively harvest a grain crop: feeding, processing, and cleaning. The feeding system works by gathering the crop from the field and delivering it into the combine. The head gathers the crop by stripping, cutting, or picking it up off the ground. Different heads must be used for different types of crops. Once gathered, the feeder house receives the crop from the head and moves it to the processor for threshing and separating. All combines have a processor, generally a cylinder or rotor, designed to gently remove or thresh the grain from the plant. The rotor rotates in one direction, processing the crop material. As the material moves through the rotor, it rubs across a metal grate or concave. The rubbing action removes the grain from the plant material. The grain and some small material other than grain, known as mog, falls through the concave, where it's permanently separated from larger plant material. The larger straw and mog moves toward the rear of the machine for discharge. After the crop is threshed and separated, gravity causes the heavier materials, like grain, to continue to fall through the cleaning shoe. The chaffer and sieve move back and forth to separate the grain from the mog. This action ensures that the material is always moving. Once the grain is clean, it moves to the grain handling system for storage and transfer. The grain remains in the grain tank until it's offloaded using the unloading auger, which swings out from the combine over a grain truck.
All right, that was perfect timing.
Very good. A couple questions while you're getting out to show them the combine. How long from the time you plant the soybeans till you harvest, on average, how many days is that?
Oh, it really varies. Soybeans are very unique plants, and they go. It can vary depending on the year, but roughly, you know, we're planting these things in May and June, and we're harvesting them here anywhere in September, October, and sometimes even November. But so that's about how long it takes to do that. So we just pulled up to the truck here, and like you guys saw in this video, flip you guys around here. We've pulled up to my truck here. I've got the auger out, and we'll dump these beans out of the tank that I just harvested. Now, while we're talking about these, I guess it's important to note that a lot of the uses that we use these soybeans for, you know, first and foremost, this combine runs on what we call biodiesel. So they'll take these beans and we take them to what we call a crusher. There's a plant called ADM down in Fostoria, and they'll take these beans and they'll crush the oil out of them, and they'll use that oil to make biodiesel. They also use it to make inks, like in your newspapers, magazines, things like that. Also use it in paints and stains, stain your deck, put paints on your wall, and all kinds of different things like that. So a lot of great uses. Something else to note with these soybeans as well, the actual plant fodder that we put on the ground for our livestock operation, we're not doing it in this field, but we'll actually windrow the soybean fodder, the actual plant, after we thresh the soybeans out of them, and we'll use those for bedding for our livestock as well. So with that, I'll hop out here and we'll kind of show you how big the combine is, what the combine actually looks like, and go from there.
Okay, there are a couple questions that came in, maybe some folks who joined a little bit late. Nathan farms in Wood County near Perrysburg, so just south of Toledo, Northwest Ohio. And his combine was running at a little over 4 miles per hour. Nathan, how long does it take you to harvest all your crops in the fall? I know it varies depending on weather, but
yeah, usually about a month and a half is how long it takes us to harvest. And I know there's a lot of questions about how many hours a day it takes us to harvest. And we're usually running anywhere from 12 to 16 hours a day, usually while the weather's good. And we've got a beautiful day here in Northwest Ohio to harvest. It's just gorgeous. One of the best days we've had to harvest this year so far. So you guys are really this is a great time to be involved with this virtual farm tour today. Anything else before I get into the combine, Tom?
Well, we got a couple other questions. You've been talking about 12, 14, 60 hours a day. Do you work that much year round?
No, we do not work that much year round. I do have life outside of farming with my wife and children. My kids are involved in sports. My kids are involved in 4-H, the 4-H organization. My wife and I are involved in the 4-H organization. So we do take time. We do not work 12-hour days year round. We do have our busy times a year during planting and harvest, like we are right now. But for the most part, we keep normal hours other than that.
Okay,
And a couple other.
Yeah, real quickly, show us a little bit about the combine.
So this is the combine. We've got the header on the front is what we call our grain table. This is 35 feet wide, which it looks kind of small in this picture, but this is 35 feet across here. And this is what takes in the grain. We've got the reel that gathers the crop in. These tines will grab a hold of the plant and keep it going into the machine. And then you'll see we've got their serrated knives all along this entire, what we call our cutter bar. So these are very sharp knives, and these are located all along this 35 feet of this cutter bar. And that's what cuts the plants off right at the ground. And you can kind of see down here, they're cut right off just like your lawnmower would cut grass, right down low to the ground. And then from there, you'll see they come into this drum right here, this what we call our drum or auger here, come into the combine and go right here into the middle of the combine, and then they go into the threshing part of the combine here. But as I walk around, this is one of my trailers. We use this trailer to haul cattle feed and also grain on the farm. This is a 42-foot long trailer. But you can kind of see this combine. These tires are almost as tall as I am. They're about 5 feet tall. The front tires are. The rear tires are about 3.5, 4 feet tall. And up top here, you'll see the grain tank. That's where all that extension that comes out on the top, that actually folds down and back up, just like a tent would. And then you can see the auger that comes across over here. And then another important part of the combine, after everything gets threshed, the plant material will come out the back of the combine back here, and then these paddles in the back will spread the fodder out, or the plant material out across the ground.
Very good. Why don't you start telling us, okay, after you put the soybeans, you harvest them with the combine, put the beans in your truck, what happens to them then? Where do you take them?
Yeah, so most of the time we take our soybeans to the elevator, and that's where we usually sell them to an elevator, which is basically a grain buying company. We sell them to them. We haul them in there. I think Dan's got a great video here. This is a great example of an elevator, and this would be dumping the grain into a pit, and then they store them in large silos. So Dan gets this up and running. Right there, they're loading into a truck, which would be much like we would be dumping grain. He's getting ready to dump it into a pit there. So right there, it goes down into a big grain pit underneath where the truck is located at. And those two tall, what looks like ladders, those are what we call a grain leg. And that elevates the grain to the very top of the silo. The grain will then, once he gets that started going, it'll elevate, which is the reason why they call it an elevator. These grain legs will elevate the grain all the way to the top of the silos, and then the grain manager dictates which bin that the grain will go into, and then it is stored in there. The grain managers can then, we want to keep this grain viable to store it for up to 2 or 3 years. A lot of times is how long they'll store it. But they keep air blowing on it, try to keep moisture out of it. That's the biggest thing. Just like you guys have a loaf of bread in your house, if you get moisture into it, it'll start growing mold. So same thing goes with the elevator. Try to keep the moisture out. But right there, you'll see now they're starting to unload the silo right there. They'll dump that grain out, and then it'll elevate it again, And if you look off to the right-hand side, you'll see what looks like a rail car. That's the way a lot of this grain is moved. Here in Northwest Ohio, we either move our grain by rail, truck, or boats. We're right here along the Maumee River, so we actually are a very unique spot here. We can load ships, large ships that'll hold roughly just shy of 1 million bushel, and we can ship them wherever we want to ship beans to.
Very good. I'm going to try to throw some questions at you real quick here. I think you mentioned earlier that you raise cattle as well as soybeans and corn and some other feed for your crops. The combine runs a little over 4 miles per hour. How tall are the beans when you harvest them?
Yeah, so these beans are roughly knee high right now, and we'll walk out. We never did really walk up close and look at these beans, but yeah, the beans are usually knee to waist high on average.
Okay.
So that's about how tall they are.
How much does a combine cost?
Combine is much similar to buying a house. This my combine that you can see in the background here is roughly about $350,000 to buy one.
And how many weeks a year do you use it?
About 4 weeks a year, usually 4 to 5 weeks.
How many? Do you have
Go ahead.
storage bins on your field at your farm?
We do not. We're pretty fortunate here in Northwest Ohio. Wherever I farm at, there's an elevator within 5 miles of where we farm, and there's plenty of storage. So there's no need for me to have on-farm storage at this time.
Okay. How long does it take you to harvest 1 acre?
1 acre. Well, this combine will harvest. I'm running roughly 17 acres an hour with this machine.
Okay, very good. And I think you mentioned earlier you farm with your brothers. Is that true?
That is correct. My 2 brothers and myself, we farm here together. All 3 of us. We can get along as brothers.
Oh, that's good. Okay. So you mentioned earlier that trucks, trains, ships. Why are ships so important to soybean farmers?
Well, ships, we export right here in Ohio. We export roughly 60% of our soybeans get exported here out of Ohio. We don't use them all what I call domestically. These beans, they get shipped all over the world. Here's a great example of one of the ships that gets loaded with soybeans and gets hauled out either to China, anywhere in Asia. I mean, really all over the world, our beans go from right here in Ohio, and we raise great beans. Overseas, they really want to see high protein content soybeans, and these beans right here in Northwest Ohio have some of the highest content protein out of anywhere in the world.
Great. Why don't we real quickly go through some of the other uses for soybeans? You mentioned biodiesel and some other things, but why don't we run real quickly through some of the pictures? Soybeans' #1 customer are animals. So why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so we use a lot of the byproducts. After, I talked to you guys about crushing soybeans for oil. Well, we have a byproduct. We have the dry matter that's left from crushing those soybeans, and a lot of that gets used in livestock. So hog feed is a giant user of what we call soybean meal, and obviously the poultry industry as well. So we've got a lot of great livestock operations here in Northwest Ohio. Here's another example, like I talked to you before, about using biodiesel. We use that in our combine, our trucks, our tractors, our pickup trucks. Just an all-around great product. And as I told you before, paints and stains as well. And these are some examples of some hand sanitizers that we use soy in. Really, anything that has is a petroleum-based product, we can almost substitute every time with soybean oil. That's our end goal. Some of the other things, your foam in your car seats, dash panels, any kind of plastics. We can use soybean hulls and soybean oil for as well. And there's also food grade stuff. So your oils in for your baking, for your crackers. We have some food grade beans, which are not what I'm growing here right now, but you've got your tofu as well.
Yeah. A lot of the soybean oil is used in like salad dressings and in baking, as Nathan mentioned. In making candy, there's soy and chocolate, usually chocolate candy, wide variety of food products.
That is
And
correct, Tom.
Yep, and here's an example of AstroTurf or Sinlon. The backing on that is used is made from a soy bean based product.
Yes, and I think there were some other questions that I saw, Tom, about what are some of the other jobs that I do here on the farm,
Right.
And you've really got to be a jack of all trades. You know, we're constantly looking at the weather. I'm not a meteorologist, but we've got to constantly look at the weather. Accounting is a big one. You've got to be great with numbers. I keep track of all my own record keeping. You've got to be savvy with a computer. Everything we run anymore, we have iPads, tablets in our combines, in my planting tractor, in our sprayer, just record keeping of all sorts. We've really got to be able to do that. And then with the livestock side of things, you know, we're nutritionists. We're constantly changing the blend of our livestock feed. You know, we've got to be able to look at an animal and decide whether it's sick or not, and whether we want to treat that with antibiotics or let the sickness run its course. We've got to be mechanics. We've got to be able to work on these combines, tractors, planters, electrician. We're all the time rewiring as things get more and more electronic on these machines. We're constantly diagnosing issues that we have with these machines. So a lot of different things we're doing here on the farm on a daily basis. No 2 days are the same.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've got a few more questions to ask you really quickly. How many acres do you and your brothers farm? I think you said at the beginning, but we may have had some people join late.
Yeah, we're right at we're right at 2,000 acres that we farm here in Wood County, and then we also, as I said before, we also have about 800 head of cattle that we have on feed all the time.
Yeah. How old is your combine?
This combine is a 2013.
Okay, and how long is it?
It's roughly about 20 feet long.
Okay, and if you had a grain bin, what do grain bins usually hold? How many bushels of soybeans would you say?
Grain bins will hold anywhere from usually 10,000 bushels all the way up to we can even hold about 1 million bushels in some of the big ones.
Okay, and can you spend a little bit of time talking about how you care for the soil and make sure that it's as good as it can be?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're a little unique to other farmers with having the livestock business. We obviously produce manure. So we use manure on about half of our acres. So about 1,000 acres we have that we spread manure on. And then we hold all those nutrients in with cover crops. Everything we do is in a giant cycle. So we spread manure, we plant the seeds to use the nutrients that the manure has in it, and that's what we use to grow a crop. And then we use these crops to either feed livestock, feed you guys as people, or different industrial uses like we talked about earlier. So it's just a giant cycle of what we're doing here. But some of the things that we're doing to care for our soil here is utilizing manure and cover crops. We want to try and hold our nutrients here on the soil so that we can use them for our grain that we're producing here.
What do you do since you're near Lake Erie? What do you do to keep the soil in your farm field? You mentioned
Yes.
cover crops. What other kinds of things do you do?
Yeah, cover crops is a big part of what we do here. Constantly keeping something planted. Like this field here, we'll probably come in and plant what we call a cereal rye. And most of that stuff then we use as a forage. We'll chop that, like I said earlier, we'll chop silage and use that for cattle feed.
Okay, very good. Are you near some soybean plants? Can you
I
really
am.
quickly show us what they look at, and what's the most difficult part of your job? Somebody wants to know.
So the most difficult part of my job is really just being patient and waiting for the plants to come up, waiting for them to ripen so that we can harvest them at the right time.
Right.
Uh, that's the most difficult part, is just being patient. But this is a soybean plant, and as I told you before, here is this is a 4-bean pod, which is great. This is what we love to see. Um, and usually there's roughly anywhere from 50 to 90 pods on a plant. And each one of these has 3 to 4 beans in each pod. So you can just about imagine, as we look out over this 80-acre field, how many beans we're actually harvesting out of here. Um, so it's great. And how we know these beans are ready to go. These pods, you can just kind of put them between your fingers and pop them open, and these beans will just fall out of here. So you can see there's a bean right there. Um, and it's good to go. And how I know that they're ready to go, I actually put them in my mouth and bite on them. And if they snap when I bite into them, I know they're ready to harvest.
Very good. Another question, please. We're getting ready to wrap up, but if you have any questions, please put them in. Do the deer do much damage to your crops?
Yes, we have a lot of deer around here that do damage. They don't necessarily eat these beans, but when this field is green, they'll actually come in and make beds in them because they can hide from different predators out here when the beans are tall. And so you'll see areas that are all matted down where these deer will actually make beds out here in these soybean fields.
You mentioned that you're a fifth generation farmer. So how long has your family been farming in Northwest Ohio? How many
So
years?
so roughly since the early 1900s is when we've been here. Always right around Perrysburg.
Okay. Question. I may jump in on this one. Do people eat soybeans? Well, you may have heard of edamame. Edamame are a special kind of soybean uh, that is harvested for human consumption, but it's totally different than the soybeans that Nathan is growing on his farm. And another question is, they also eat soybeans. Nathan mentioned food grade soybeans. We ship a lot of those from Ohio to Asia and to other parts of the United States. Tofu is made from soy protein. If you've ever eaten tofu, there are other things like natto and so on. Also, soy milk is made from soy protein or soybean meal. And I think you see that on the shelves in your grocery store. And how fast do the cleaning fans or mechanism in your combine go? Do you know at what RPM they revolution?
Rough. So roughly my cylinder speed, which is the rotor that's inside there that actually threshes the grain out of the plant, that's running roughly about 600 RPM. And then my fan is running about 900 RPM.
Okay. And how often are you likely to replace your combine?
Usually we usually trade combines about every 3 to 4 years.
Okay. And how many different pieces of machinery do you have on the farm?
Oh man, I think we've got 10 tractors, 1 combine, 4 semis, a sprayer,
A planter?
and then a bunch. Yeah, we actually have 3 planters, We've got a big 24-row corn planter, 12-row corn planter, and then a grain drill that we plant all these beans with.
How do you plant the seeds in the soil? You mentioned the drill. Could you talk about that real quickly?
Our beans we plant in 7.5-inch rows, and it's putting down seeds roughly 1 inch to 1.5 inches in the soil, sometimes 2 inches, depending on where the moisture's at in the soil. And it's doing that uniformly across the field at roughly 6.5 miles an hour. So if you think about, there's 48 rows on my bean planter, and if you think about we're planting 160,000 seeds per acre, just how fast those beans are coming out of that planter. There's roughly a bean about every 3 inches in every 7.5-inch rows.
Okay, very good. One of our classes has to leave, so we'll say thank you to the third graders at Highland Drive Elementary for joining us today. They asked that we shout out to them, so thanks for joining us. We're going to answer 1 or 2 more questions. Where do you store your combine?
I have a barn. I have a barn that's 70 feet wide by 300 feet long, and most of my machinery all fits in there. So that's where this thing gets parked during the wintertime and when we're not using it. I also have a shop that's 50 feet by 60 feet that I do most of my mechanic work in. So a lot of things under roof that we have at my house. There you'll see that's a shot of my home farm right there. So you'll see actually how large that barn is. It's about 300 feet long. So yeah, almost all my machinery will fit in there.
Very good. Let's see if we have any last questions. I don't think so. At this point, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. This is a book you should all have received or will receive from Grow Next Gen, all about seeds and for use in your classroom. I hope you use it. On behalf of Ohio soybean farmers and their education program, Grow Next Gen, I want to thank you for attending today. I want to thank Nathan for being our tour guide today. We really appreciate everything you've done. Thank you to Benjamin Logan School, St. Mary of the Immaculate Conception in Avon. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate your work, and make sure you go to Grow Next Gen. Lots of good things there for teachers and students to use in the classroom. Nathan, once again, thank you. Thank you, Director Dan. And with that, we really appreciate your participation today.
Yes, thanks, everybody.